Hello and welcome. This is Congruent Coo, a project about Cass the Coo and me, Cille the Human, as we explore leftist thinking, deconstruct the myths of capitalism, and talk about social justice as well as other important topics, and maybe even provide guidance for those looking for somewhere that aligns with their thoughts that can be difficult to articulate. We're here to learn as much as you are. Today's topic is American presidents and how they aren't fit to lead because they're awful people and war criminals. I grew up hearing about how great America is, how this is the best country on earth to live in. Yet, as time has gone by and I've grown up, I've realized how much of what I've been fed my entire life is just lies. One of these are stories of the presidents that were great for this nation, key figures that stood out, and the rest that fell between. Presidents have the greatest honor and are elected by the people, for the people. They represent the best of us. That is such a lie in retrospect. They represent popularity by the white middle class and lobbying groups. They've overseen so much violence and destruction. They have pushed America as a source of vast amounts of terrorism throughout the entire world, which is really scary. Well, there were plenty of good presidents. So many great men have led this country. You don't know what you're talking about. Okay, sure. Let's go with that. Some of the top contenders for great presidents that have come to my mind, the ones that stand out from when I took history classes in school. There's the fairly obvious ones: George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Franklin D. Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy. Now, which ones had the highest peak approval ratings? George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush, Truman, even Reagan is found in the top 10. And at the bottom of the barrel, some of those that at one point did have fantastic approval ratings, the likes of Jimmy Carter, Richard Nixon, Lyndon Johnson, and of course, Donald Trump. That's a whole lot of presidents to raise issue with. Well, actually, I have issues with almost all of them. Even William Henry Harrison, one of the guys praised for murdering Native Americans who got sick after a lengthy inauguration address, the record for the longest so far, who died 31 days into office. I have issues with him. Even the guy who was sick for his entire presidency and died. He had a special vice president, one who assumed the presidency, one who no one liked. John Tyler, the 10th president of the United States. He ignored the agenda laid out by his predecessor, wouldn't listen to suggestions of administration direction, and when he left office, he went back to his plantation with enslaved people. Oh yeah. And when push came to shove, this dweeb decided he would side with the Confederacy, the only president to do so. The first president of our great nation was George Washington. He was a military man who on May 31st, 1779, against a treaty made with the Iroquois tribes of New York, committed acts of genocide. He killed as many Native Americans as possible from this day forward indiscriminately, and those who survived, they were passed out as newly enslaved people to those who were deemed deserving of them. George Washington instructed Major General John Sullivan to attack the hostile tribes of the 6 nations of Indians and ensure the total destruction and devastation of their settlements and the capture of as many prisoners of every age and sex as possible. This was how America started its long line of atrocious presidential goblins. The very first showing no mercy in completely disgusting actions. From that June to that December, 40 Native American settlements were massacred. Thousands died. Thousands more were displaced. Next up, we have a cheerful Abraham Lincoln, cheerful as a coo and a crass, mind you. But he helped to end slavery. Did he? The Emancipation Proclamation didn't end slavery and really only applied to those states which had seceded. It also had promises dependent on military victory. Now, I'm not going to dispute that it was an influence in pushing America to be better, but it certainly wasn't a magic document. That aside, however, let's look into why he was a right ding-dong. The largest mass execution in America was ordered by Lincoln on 38 Native Americans for rebelling. Not only that, but there was also General Sherman and the scorched earth policy. He had free rein in destroying everything in his pathway. Under Lincoln, his army ravaged through Georgia and made it howl. He made the war on civilians and the infrastructure that supported them. And he encouraged the depredations of his men, unlike other leaders. A real couple of cantaloupes here. Roosevelt, this heroic president. Who could have the Manhattan Project develop the atomic bomb other than a man with the best intentions? Who else could join in on a joint venture with the always correct and on the good side of history, Britain, to carpet bomb Dresden in Germany, killing 50,000 civilians? Franklin D. Roosevelt. Oh, and let's not forget the executive order from this chud to establish Japanese internment camps from 1942 to 1945. That's right, Americans of Japanese descent incarcerated in isolated camps, whole families locked away. A disgusting display of the lack of humanity. And all it took was being 1/16th Japanese. And this included tens of thousands of children. This was only to help fight the big bad evils of the world, though, right? It's not like he would do something like turn away ships carrying German Jew refugees and deny entry to tens of thousands seeking to escape oppression from Nazi Germany. He wouldn't do something like that, right? Right, guys? I dare say. What a bigot. Kennedy. Now, nothing bad could be said against an assassinated president, yeah? Yeah, well, John F. Kennedy was a bright young president ready to make a name for himself, and that he did. 4 months after he became president in 1961, he approved the Bay of Pigs, a failed, full-scale invasion launched by the CIA to remove Fidel Castro from power in Cuba. Coincidentally, in 1962, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis. If that wasn't a whirlwind start to a presidency, he invaded South Vietnam just 7 months after the Bay of Pigs. American aircraft performed missions using chemical weapons such as napalm. One of the targets of the operations were the food crops that fed the people living there. One more war criminal on the stage. Nothing new from America, I suppose. Let's keep moving on. Unlike Kennedy. Truman. Oh, Harry. His first year in office is nauseating, at the very least. Only a leader of morality would do something so great as to... Something so atrocious as to retaliate against an attack by choosing to attack and murder civilians of a country. Well, this blathering tomato decided to not only drop 1, but went on to drop 2 nuclear bombs on Japan, 1 on Hiroshima and 1 on Nagasaki. Over 200,000 civilian deaths were a result of an attack that removed 2 cities from existence in an instant. Later, our dear Harry went on to send American troops to the Korean War without congressional support, though Congress has been filled with its own set of problematic llamas. Good thing he entered into this war too, because without American assistance, it wouldn't have ended in a right. North and South Korea signed an armistice and created a demilitarized zone in 1953, but never a peace treaty. And they are technically still at war today. A new low, but somehow every president since has wanted a piece of that war crime pie. Hashtag, we're winning now, Mr. Krabs. My favorite of the 20th century dweebs would have to be the villainous, sentient cement mixture named Ronald Reagan. Ugh. Afghanistan, 1978. There was the Sour Revolution that overthrew their monarchy and installed a democratic republic. Those things America hates. They reformed the country, especially pushing women's rights, and had the unfortunate favor of the Soviet Union. Not because of what the Soviets did, of course, but because of how Reagan, the President of the United States, and his CIA responded between 1981 and 1989. Funding and arming of jihadist militants began, militants known as the Mujahideen, or, as Reagan called them, the freedom fighters. While the support began with President Carter, Reagan definitely held firmly to it throughout his entire presidency. Not we've ever once seen or heard anything of the Mujahideen again. Al-Qaeda? The Taliban? The Reagan administration, in all their wisdom, also decided to illegally sell weapons to Iran, who was holding American citizens hostage. Why? These funds were used for arming and training the Contra-terrorist army in Nicaragua. That's not even mentioning the sponsoring of military dictatorship in El Salvador and supporting Guatemala's dictator Efrain Rios Montt. Reagan went so far as supporting apartheid in South Africa. And we're not even going to touch the domestic policies and legislation for economics, which are horrendous. Reagan might stand as one of the most evil men to lead this great nation. A small piece of cud for you to chew on. What the CIA did in Nicaragua was so bad, the International Court of Justice condemned the Reagan administration for the use of excessive force, a euphemism for international terrorism. The UN Security Council also passed resolutions to stop the U.S. from funding the Contras, which, unsurprisingly, America vetoed. Reagan, of course, had a lovely vice president, a bright and heroic man from Massachusetts called George Herbert Walker Bush. This disgusting, hypocritical maniac had a career in politics from ambassador to the United Nations to at one point even directing the CIA under Ford. Everything he worked for led to his presidency, in which he made the world a better place and cleaned up America and enriched the lives of everyone. Scratch that. Bush invaded Panama and stirred the Gulf War, attacking Iraq. In the 1980s, the U.S. supplied aid and arms to a dictator in Panama, a Manuel Noriega. When Noriega annulled a democratic election to remain in power, suddenly the Bush administration had issues with him. Let's not dive into how Noriega was recruited by the CIA in the 70s and worked as an operative smuggling weapons to Nicaragua in Central America. Bush dispatched military forces to Panama, and when a serviceman was shot and killed, sent a full invasion force, Operation Just Cause, solely for the best interests of the United States. George H.W. Bush wasn't done there, though. In 1990, Saddam Hussein of Iraq invaded the country of Kuwait. The negative responses by the Western world had massive influence, but repeated negotiation attempts for a peaceful withdrawal from Kuwait by the Iraqis were shot down by the USA. The Iraqis made numerous pleas for negotiations from August 1990 until the U.S. invasion in January 1991. During the invasion, American-led forces attacked Iraq, many attacks targeting the country's civilian infrastructure. As Iraqi forces fled from Kuwait, the U.S. indiscriminately bombed them, along with civilians, in one of the most egregious of America's war crimes, dubbed the Highway of Death. Don't worry, the Bush legacy isn't done in the Middle East. In 2001, Al-Qaeda hijacked airlines and attacked the U.S. on its own soil. President George W. Bush, son of George H.W. Bush, reacted by declaring a war on terror. The U.S. invaded Afghanistan illegally, seeking Osama bin Laden. W. then conferred with God and was told about peace in the Middle East. This led to the illegal invasion and occupation of Iraq. A quick peek at the war crimes under Bush's administration include, but are not limited to, the CIA's enhanced interrogation techniques, which included waterboarding, the abuse and killing of prisoners of war in Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay, the illegal use of white phosphorus on enemy combatants and civilians in Fallujah in 2004, the Haditha massacre of civilians by U.S. forces in 2005, the terrible sexual assault and murder of a 14-year-old girl and her family in Mahmoudiya in 2006, and last but not least, the famous Collateral murder video depicting the slaying of journalists by U.S. helicopters, something that was leaked by the whistleblower Chelsea Manning. But it's fine, though. God said it was okay. Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are terrorists. George W. Bush. Obama. Barack Obama. President Barack Obama. A liberal's wet dream. War criminal. President Barack Obama. Obama and his global assassination campaign. All that is needed to know about why Obama is an awful human being is his drones. Ignore anything else he did, and he is still suckling on that war crime teat. The Obama administration leaned into drone strikes and attacked suspects of terrorism, as they themselves engendered terrorism. Hundreds of civilians, some of which were citizens of the United States, were killed in these attacks. These attacks were carried out in Pakistan, Libya, Somalia, and Yemen. What's that about a liberal's wet dream? Oh yeah, as usual with any president, the atrocities are overlooked. This leads into Obama's vice president, our beloved Joe Biden. Some geezer older than the civil rights movement, but we'll get to him in just a moment. Another piece of cut for you all, on very shaky legal ground, was Operation Neptune Spear, the U.S. Special Forces mission in Pakistan that led to the death of Osama bin Laden. Despite U.S. propaganda to the contrary, the involvement of Pakistani officials in locating bin Laden meant that Neptune Spear was always going to be a kill operation, placing it into a huge gray area of international law. Here are some of the worst precedents that popped up in my mind and why I think they are awful people, up to and including war criminals. Lyndon B. Johnson expanded the war in Vietnam from the hostilities that began under Kennedy. He also invaded the Dominican Republic to stop a democratic government from forming, something that America for some reason hates, and offered strong support of Israel in its early stages. Nixon, aside from all the domestic scandals, bombed Cambodia, leading to 500,000 deaths. Jimmy Carter gave advanced weaponry, financial help, and training to Indonesia during the East Timor genocide. He also participated in the Camp David agreements between Israel and Egypt, and raised the amount of aid we gave to Israel. Israel, the oppressive and fascist state, illegally occupying lands of Palestinians while murdering civilians, denying their human rights, and committing genocide. Lastly is Donald J. Trump, an absurd baboon who assassinated Iranian General Soleimani and ramped up the drone strikes from the Obama administration, continuing the wholesale murder of civilians. Now, back to Joseph Biden. We'll not pin all of Obama's crimes on this dweeb too, though he would certainly be a war criminal just by his active hand in dealing with the prior administration. Biden has been extremely pro-Israel in a very violent and alarming manner. So far, in fact, a member of the Mossad death squads, Menachem Begin, said that Biden was too extreme even for him because of Biden's defense of the killing of women and children in Lebanon. Biden is fervent in his support of all things Israel and doesn't ignore their crimes against humanity, but instead justifies and supports them. Of course, pre-presidency, in 1998, Biden claimed that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, which influenced the war in Iraq. He was fully in support of this war at the time. As for his presidency and who he is now, in 2021, a month after becoming the President of the United States, this war criminal decided to launch airstrikes and bomb Syrian facilities said to belong to Iran-backed militia groups. We're in the beginning of his presidency, and already he's off to bombing in the Middle East, followed by approving the sale of almost $1 billion worth of precision-guided weapons to Israel. Buckle up, friends. But at least he's not Orange Man. Orange Man bad. I hope that at some point we will see some meaningful change in the leadership or faux leadership of the United States. In a stained history filled with awful and disgusting rich old guys, America doesn't seem like it will be changing course anytime soon. Our history is filled with blood, is built with blood, and thrives on blood. From our very first president to our current one, they are all just old men waging wars and committing crimes with impudence. Noam Chomsky has said that by the very U.S. definition of terrorism, they themselves are probably the most egregious terrorist state to have existed. That if Nuremberg principles were applied, every post-World War II president would be indictable. And I quote, "It's official. The U.S. is the world's leading terrorist state. I'm proud of it." Thanks for watching this week's episode of Congruent Coo. Stay cute out there, friends. Bye-bye.